The first two presentations today actually give me sort of a great place to start, because I want to sort of get, I've been asked to get a little more hands down and dirty with the craft of online series and episodic storytelling, and why I've just called this Stories in Pieces. I work across a lot of different formats, both interactive and traditional TV and film and online, but as has come up, I've worked on a lot of these shows that we've talked about as a consultant or a story editor. And what I want to put to you today is essentially the things I've noticed that are often lacking in projects that come in, or the things we're looking for that's the difference between a show that is weak and a show that is strong, a show that has got a really solid concept and has a chance to find its audience and go well, and one that needs work. So I'm going to pull out the top 5 things for me that I'm looking for in these shows. A lot of my work has been working with networks such as the ABC and looking for shows they're commissioning for iView. You'll hear more from Q, who's actually the ABC's executive producer on Deadlock, but she's involved in a lot in the online content. She'll talk about the ABC's particular perspective. But whether it's working for YouTube who commissioning original material, some of these new and streaming platforms, the ABC, and I work with WarnerBros in the US, the common denominator is around finding the key elements that are going to empower a story to be told episodically, to find its audience, to be compelling, and to make us return. These fundamental things that an episodic story does that a feature or a short film never has to, which is make your audience come back. And we have to remember that. I see a lot of shows, or pitches for shows that are to be online streaming shows that feel like you took your feature and cut it up into pieces to stick it online. It's a recipe for failure every time. Or you see something that really was only 2 episodes and the idea ran dry and they're trying to get 13 out of it. And various other forms of do you have the right story to fit a box which is online, on demand and episodic. And a lot of it, certainly a lot of what Christian and Mike said this morning is going to resonate with some of the things I'm going to talk about now. Cool? Good? No one came from macrame and ended up in the wrong place? So I want to start with my thing working. That's what I want to start with. Hello? Oh, close. I want to start with 4 principles. Like I said, the 4 things that have stood out to me over the many, many pitches and outlines and projects that I've seen. Some of these are going to be fairly obvious, but perhaps a new way of thinking about them. Some of them might be new. Some relate to the craft of writing and producing and directing. Others relate to how we distribute or think about our audience in that online space. So they're going to range, and then I want to dig into one of them. The first one is this: story well before plot. And this is a really important idea, particularly for online. It would be true if we were talking about television. And the best example I can give of this is exactly what Christian said this morning when he talked about defining Bondi hipsters. And I'm going to misquote him, but he said, it's about 2 guys who want to be world famous for being underground. That's a show. You don't need to tell me the plot. You don't need to tell me about the time they start a cafe that's so exclusive that nobody goes to it. You don't need to tell me the story about the music video they made. What you've given me in that line is the engine of a show, which is fundamentally about irony. And if you've seen Bondi Hipsters, that's what it's all about. It's about irony. It's about this collision between how they want to be seen and who they are, and how that creates a kind of falsity. And so in that line, you get the beginnings of an engine of a story. There's a principle that I've sort of learned over the years. When you know a good pitch, when they're not telling you a story, what they've given you is enough forces in opposition, enough pressure in what they've described, that you, as the recipient of the pitch, start making up the story for them. They go, it's about this and that and that, and I go, oh, okay, I can see where this is going. And you know you've got a good pitch to someone, an executive or a producer or whoever you want to work with, or potentially has money to give you. You know you've got a good pitch when they start putting the story back to you. Because what you will have pitched them then is a story world, an engine for your story, rather than a plot line. And if I ever, stop and say, what's your show about, and you start telling me a plot, you're probably already behind the 8 ball, because you're going to run into a problem of you've got a prefix storyline that you're going to chop up into pieces. That's going to create problems. Or you're leaping to a cause and effect chain rather than telling me the thing that's going to make me come back, which is the story world, to be in that place. Now, this is obviously particularly true for comedy. So you take something like Bondi Hipsters, how many episodes of Bondi Hipsters could there be? How many you got? Like, infinite. And that's because the engine's so solid and so clear and so clean that it can spew out as many story elements as you want. Now you take that to drama, things start to get a little bit more complicated. And it's not to say that every story has to have 22 seasons and go on forever. But it is about understanding what it is I'm coming back for. What is that returnable element? And invariably that's not just plot points. The most compelling returnable element for a story is that I want to spend more time in that world. I want to go to that place. And that's why I often say to people, give me the world before the plot. Give me that unique set of forces for which I then start to create a story. We see it in the Bondi Hipsters, to use an example. We also saw it in Event Zero, which we showed from Enzo Tedeschi, which is, you have no idea what the plot is, but it's clearly got something to do with racial tensions and a terrorist attack. But you've got a maelstrom of forces, there's police and there's little kids and this, and I get where that might go. And I can start to write the story. So to pitch that show, you don't need to tell me the plot, you need to give me a trigger and an engine that could sustain it. It's a really important place to start, and it's really seeing that the central IP you have as a creator is not a plot. It's the engine of the story. It's that story world, that place I want to keep going back to. You with me? Excellent. That's number one. Number two on my hit parade is this idea, audience-facing iterative development. In many ways, this is an anathema for how we have traditionally thought about film and television. In film and TV, over many, many years, we tend to make things like this. Shh, don't tell anyone about it. It's a secret. And when it's done, I'm going to emerge fully formed into the world. It'll be perfect. And exactly as I think Christian said, you know, you make these 10-part series, you put the first episode out, realize it's a total dud, and the 8th gets shelved. The online space demands something different. The whole idea of finding a show or something you like online is in many ways about finding your tribe, finding your clan. And the best thing about finding a show online or something you really dig is you get to say, you've got to check out this thing. Because now you're an evangelist for it. It's your thing, because you found it. In all that archipelago of maelstrom chaos there is online, you found this thing and you want to share it. So online audiences are very much about feeling like insiders. It's clan-like. Those clans can get very, very big in an online world, but it's like there's a fetish for everyone. There's no sexual perversion you could come up with there isn't a Facebook group for. Because that's what the internet does. It brings people together no matter how obscure their fascinations are. The same thing happens with the audience for your shows. So you've got to be specific about it. Now to do that, you need to invite them in. So this old tradition of, this is my secret project, and quick, don't leak anything, is an anathema to what the online space does. So when we look at online shows, we're saying, share publicly, be open, tell people you're making it, share the process of making it, invite them in right from the beginning. We see that in the same way we talk, as Mike certainly talked about, that invariably the investment paradigm is being shifted. It's no longer come to get the money to prove I can make a show with an audience. It's bring the audience and then you leave them with no argument to not give you the money. Very hard to say no to the Bondi Hipsters when they've got 200,000 views in 30 seconds. With Deadlock, the show we're making at the moment, we've cast two fantastic Australian YouTube talents called the Raka Raka, two identical twins from Adelaide. They have 4 million YouTube subscribers. I'm just going to say that number again because it's mind-boggling. There's no TV show in Australia that gets 4 million viewers. And that's just their subscribers, let alone the just regular views they get. It's very difficult when they say we've got a show to say no because they've got an audience. So audiences are powerful. But the way they built that audience was inviting them in right from the beginning, being completely open about their process, sharing it from the start, not keeping secrets, not necessarily giving away all the plot or giving away the excitement of what's going to happen, but absolutely being open to that audience. Subsequently, your audiences become fans. And I think that's something that's very true to say about online series audiences, is that they're not casual. They either love you or they're not interested or they hate you, and that's a whole other thing. They're very passionate. So if they're into you, in which case they want to own you and they want to feel invested in you and they want to be a part of what you're doing. And that's the best thing about that online space. That's the thing to embrace. And it starts by being there, making in pieces. And I talk about this idea of a minimum viable product. It comes from business, Silicon Valley, tech speak bullshit, but it's actually a very useful idea. It's saying, I want to make this thing. If in an ideal world, you'd give me $100 million and I would make this epic, wonderful thing, whatever that thing is. But no one's going to give you that money because that's trust, and you may not have earned the trust capital. You're not Stanley Kubrick, you're not Francis Ford Coppola. They're not just going to give you the money. So you go, all right, this is what I want to make, but that's the minimum viable product. That's the smallest version of the bigger thing I can make within the resources that I have available, which might be you, a mate, and a dog, or it might be some money from ScreenAustralia, or it might be some support on various parts of that spectrum, from nothing to something. But identifying the minimum viable product of your project is an incredibly powerful thing to do. Because otherwise, you end up like the Bondi Hipsters. Yeah, we're going to do this thing. I'm going to do that one day. and we end up gunners. I hate gunners. Go make something, and to make something you have to be strategic, and to do that, even if it's big, find the minimum viable product. Find the smallest version of your thing that you can make, which might be a trailer or a teaser. I'll give you a short example. An online show that was very successful I was involved with, got a good number of years ago now, they're part of a decade ago, or 7 or 8 years ago, was a sci-fi adventure show called Wasteland of Panda. It's a post-apocalyptic adventure series about a sort of anthropomorphic machete-wielding panda. Now, try pitching that to Channel 10 sometime. I mean, just no hope in hell. Try pitching it even to the funding bodies at that time. They just sort of said, oh, it's animated comedy. No, straight up, very serious action, big allegory. People just looked at you like you were mad. And the young team that created in Adelaide was sort of getting that response, but they went, what's our minimum viable product? They made a prologue. Not just a teaser, but a prologue that set up the world. Didn't tell us anything of the plot, but gave us such a place that you went, I gotta go there. And as one of the first comments I remember on YouTube wrote about the prologue, I would so watch the shit out of this show. was the comment. I thought, that's right. That's not just a casual, I'd check this out if I was there. It's like, if this was on, I'm in, balls deep, let me in. I would take over this show. And that's about a fan base. So suddenly now, you have a very different conversation. After that had 250,000 views in a few weeks with a very active social media campaign. You walk into a funding agency with your crazy panda idea and say, here's the metrics on my audience, here's the numbers, here's the little crowdfunding campaign we raised, which show 10,000 people gave $2, which shows you've got an audience. Suddenly they don't care what you're making. Suddenly they're like, all right, you proved it, go make it. And they did. ABC commissioned a 6-part series of that show. So this is what I mean about build incrementally, be public about what you're doing, find the smallest version of the thing you can make. Set yourself a deadline for it. Number 3 on my hit parade is patterns of closure. This is the thing I want to spend most of the time on in my little slot today. It's the thing that's missing. It's understanding that when we're telling stories in pieces, episodically, we're not just taking a long story and cutting it up into pieces. We have to think much more strategically and narratively, carefully about how to tell that story in a pattern that is compelling and cathartic. So I'm going to come back to that. I want to talk about what makes our audience come back and what are the rhythms we're creating for an audience in an episodic structure. Number 4, though, is really at the top of my list, and a lot of what I'm talking about now comes from the kind of writer's room environment that I'm either part of or in many cases often running to develop a project, to find how it might sit. And one of the key things in the online space that relates to this idea of the audience being evangelists, of being fans, of wanting to be involved, is establishing tone. The beauty of the Kettering Incident video that Mike showed, the 3-minute video, pitch video, is it nailed tone. If you've then seen the show, you know that video told you exactly how to feel about that show. And that's where I come to this word, genre. I think it's the most powerful tool a writer will ever have. Now, there might be some writing purists that go, oh, genre, avoid genre like the plague, like it's a dirty word. That's like throwing away the best tool you'll ever have in your toolbox. That's like taking away the hammer and you're a carpenter. Like, you might have a whole lot of chisels and all sorts of other stuff in there. Without a hammer, the house is not going up. But to understand why it's a powerful tool, we have to define it in a very simple way. If we're an academic, it's a category. And if we're a film scholar, we put it in a certain way. For David Stratton, we use genre in a different kind of way again. But for creators, genre is actually a very simple idea. How does your audience expect to feel? Every genre of storytelling is a set of emotional expectations. If I'm making a horror story, you expect to feel a certain way. Shock, awe, fear, dread, disgust, and any combination of those depending on the subgenre of horror you're in. If I'm making a romantic comedy, and it doesn't make you feel like pink champagne at the end, I've clearly failed the emotional contract that we set up between us. Now we start to break genre down like that, and even when we hybridize it, I've got a supernatural thriller. Okay, then what are the emotional expectations? The old adage I was taught many years ago when I first started writing was picture the poster. Write the story, but picture what's on the poster. And it wasn't about marketing or selling it. It was about understanding what's the cut through emotion. What's the thing if I see the Star Wars poster, I know how I'm going to feel. If I see the poster for The Exorcist, that stunning image of a priest standing in a way of light, oh, I know how that show is going to make me feel. That imagery is your shortcut to genre. And if you know that, if you know how your audience is meant to feel, you're in the best position to find them online. Because there's a troublesome thing about the internet. It's really big. It's full of shit. It's full of stuff. And we can run into this problem. We think, I want to make this successful online show. Right, I'll make it. I'll go to the internet and I'll yell as loudly as I can and hope people come. But it's a misconception to think about the internet as this giant continent of stuff, like a rubbish tip, where you're trying to find the gold. The better analogy is to think of it as an archipelago of islands. You don't have to be the loudest thing on the internet. You just have to be the loudest thing on your island. Right? And your island is a niche group. It's a clan, it's a cult, it's a fan base. It's the people who want that thing. And the thing they're most particularly looking for is to feel a certain way. I know when I go to that island, that story is going to make me feel that way. Inspired, enlightened, romantic, full of adventure, whatever it is that your story is trying to inspire in someone. And I point this out because one of the first things I'll ask if I sit down with the team, a lot of those projects Mike talked about came to me after they built to a certain level, and my job was to help them shape it into something bigger. And the first question I ask, how do you want your audience to feel? Don't tell me your plot, don't even tell me about your characters. Just tell me how you want them to feel. And often when you get down the nitty-gritty, it'll be a mix of things. I want them to feel that, but this. I want to take them from there to there. I want them to feel, this is absurd and silly. I want to feel fun, but I also want them to feel hope. All right, now we've got emotions we can work with. And they become a little litmus test, because anything then, choice you make in terms of the plotting, character movements, turning points, escalations, all those things that make up the creation of the story and then the execution of the story on screen, you keep coming back to what were our emotional standpoints, what's our genre. And if you come to a plot point and, hang on, that's too dark and we're trying to make a romantic comedy, or hang on, that's funny, but it's not meant to be a funny show, it's meant to be this, you're on track. And that's going to relate to where your audience is, that's going to relate to what island they're on. Does that make sense? The other way, just one other way to think about that too, the way genre connects to this iterative development, audience-facing development, is to ask not who your audience is. That's the common question you often get from funding bodies or producers. Who do you think your audience is? That's a really difficult thing to answer. It's to the point of being useless. I think a much better question is to ask where they are. What other websites do they go to? What other shows do they watch? What forums do they visit? What other websites do they read? What other forums are they part of? What magazines do they buy? If you know where they are socially and culturally, intellectually, emotionally, you'll be able to find them, because that'll be that island on the internet where you can get to them. And it leads exactly to the practical things that Christian was talking about, where he made a database of every network and blogger who wrote about the Bondi hipsters. He knows his island. He's got an Excel spreadsheet that tells him exactly who his island is on the internet. And then where's his audience? They're on that spreadsheet. And because those people all lead to 100 of their people. These are very practical things you can do. Don't look at the internet and go, do I just make it and hope they'll come? You can be very strategic about online space. Find your island. Know how you want the audience to feel. Know where they are. That's the power of genre. It's a very important thing. And I break it down to be specific. What are the feeling states of the show? These emotional expectations. How do you want the audience to feel? How do they expect to feel? Then sometimes not the same thing. They may come wanting this and you lead them to that. And the combinations are infinite, but you've got to know what they are.